Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Bow Valley Nonprofit Speaker Series. I'm going to give people a few minutes to log in before we get started. In the meantime, if you'd like to just introduce yourself in the chat box at the bottom, that'd be great. If you're looking for ways to connect with other Bow Valley nonprofits, follow our Facebook page for updates of what's happening in the Valley. And you can also check the discussion forum on the Bow Valley Nonprofit website. It's a great place to ask questions and share resources. Definitely go check that out at bowvalleynonprofits.ca. So welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Please introduce yourself in the chat box at the bottom. Before we get started, I'd just like to acknowledge that the Bow Valley is located within the Treaty 7 territory, the traditional territories and home of the Stoney Nakoda, Blackfoot, and Tsuut'ina nations, as well as Zone 3 Métis, who help us steward this land, as well as honor and celebrate this place. Before we get started, I'd like to share some housekeeping tips. If you have any questions or comments during today's session, please leave them in the comment box, the chat box at the bottom. And we'll have a Q&A session at the end of Afton's presentation, so make sure you stick around for that. There'll also be opportunities to ask questions throughout Afton's presentation. Last but not least, I'd like to say a huge thank you to Tara and Ruth from FCSS at the towns of Canmore and Banff for making the speaker series possible. All right, so today we've got Afton Brazzoni joining us from Scribe National. Afton helps organizations serve their audiences with captivating, refreshing, effective clarity through storytelling. With 10 years of experience in marketing and communications and a background in journalism, her mission is to deliver you excellent content that drives your organization forward. Afton has extensive experience developing strategies and content for industries, including arts and culture, higher education, tourism and technology, as well as for small business owners. My name's Moselle Dibden, and I'll be moderating the questions today. Now let's welcome Afton.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for having me, Moselle. Thanks to everyone who's introduced yourself so far in the chat. I see we have Ruth, Charlotte, and Michelle here so far. And for anyone else who's here, thank you as well for taking the time today. We're gonna have lots of interaction in the chat. So I'm just going to share my screen because we'll be going through a few slides today, but I'm going to keep it interactive. And of course, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to let me know. Okay, so if everybody can just open up the chat, I want to make sure that we will be able to use that. So if you don't have that, you can get that open there. So thank you for being here today for content strategy and writing. As Moselle said, I'm Afton Brazzoni. I'm the founder of Scribe National, and we're a content writing studio based in Cochrane. So I did actually live in Canmore for 7 years. We moved recently, but we've had clients in the Bow Valley throughout this whole period, and obviously really have a deep connection to the area. So it's great to be back and speaking with you all today. Now, before we dig into the details, we are going to be sitting here for an hour, and I know we've probably all have Zoom fatigue over the past 18 months or so. So if anybody wants to, do a big stretch or shake out your arms, I always like to do that before I present, or just, take a couple of deep breaths, whatever you need to do to get grounded here in this workshop. So I'm going to be asking you to do some strategic thinking here today. All right, so over the next hour, here are basically just up on the slide there, the main points that we're going to cover. So I want you to be able to walk away knowing how to define and articulate your nonprofit brand story and voice in a powerful and consistent way. And the purpose of that is to help set the foundation for your content strategy and writing. The second thing we're going to discuss is how to strategically create content for various types of audiences to maximize the impact of your content strategy. Obviously, creating content, doing communications and marketing, it takes time. You have, finite resources, and everybody does, and that's totally understandable. So I want to show you things that are going to be efficient and effective. And the third thing we're going to talk about is how to establish your organization's mission and the value of your initiatives using different types of content to generate both awareness and interest. And for anybody who's wondering at this point, I am going to define what content marketing is. So to kick things off, I know some of you have already shared, and thank you for that. If there's anyone else here who wants to pop into the chat and share, what's the nonprofit that you run or work for? I would love to hear it. Awesome. Bow Valley Nonprofits, Moselle says. Yeah, and what a fantastic organization. Oh, Tanya's here. Nice to see you, Tanya. Denise, Bowstrings Heritage Foundation, thanks for sharing. Yes. Oh, great, Tash, great to see you. So I'll let, if there's anyone else here, feel free to keep those coming in. It's always nice to know who's on the call. Looks like we've got a diverse group here today, which is awesome. So I do know some of you, others who may not know me. I'm just going to do kind of a little introduction here about Scribe National. Won't spend too much time on that because the session is for you, but just so you know where I'm coming from with this. I've been a storyteller since childhood, and I've also been a writer since then. I am a former journalist, and so my passion does really lie in telling stories. After working in corporate marketing and communications for about 10 years, I decided to start my own company, which is Scribe National, in September of 2019. And I took the company full-time in March of 2020. And since our inception, we've helped over 30 organizations tell their stories and grow their audiences, including nonprofits such as the National Access Arts Center based in Calgary, Calgary Adapted Hub, Bow Valley Immigration Partnership, and Tash is here today, which is great to see, BAM Center, Tourism Canmore Kananaskis, Arts Pond, and the ACCT Foundation. Now, I always like to say there's a gap in the marketing industry. And that gap lies in impeccable content writing. And so that's really what we seek to deliver so that you can put your best foot forward to serve your audience. We have incredible clients, and some of them I mentioned already. And our job, like I see it as that, we're here to help them connect with their audiences through what I like to call strategic storytelling. And that's what we are going to be talking about today. So let's dive into content strategy and writing. I know I'm a little biased because it is a content marketing company that I run, but I would say it's absolutely an essential activity for any organization, whether in the corporate space or like yourselves, nonprofits. Anyone that needs to drive stakeholder engagement really should be doing content marketing. And now that I know a little bit more about everyone here, I can definitely say that you are also in the right place in this workshop. So let's talk about what content marketing is and why it's important to your nonprofit. Now on the slide here, I'm not gonna recreate the wheel. I've got a definition from Neil Patel, who's widely known and well-respected in the marketing industry. And the way he puts it is that content marketing is a long-term strategy that focuses on building strong relationships with your target audience. And the way we do that is, it's not by me marketing, it's not by being overly salesy. It's by providing people with high quality content that is relevant to them on a consistent basis. And so eventually, when your stakeholders make a decision, and that could be to volunteer their time, it could be obviously to donate, it could be to form a partnership, their loyalty will already lie with you because they will know, like, and trust your audience, and they'll understand the level to which you are invested in your own community. So the idea is that content marketing will help you position your brand so it's preferred over other offerings in the space. Whether you think of them as competitors or whether you're just really trying to stand out on your own. I know sometimes we don't always have direct competitors, but the idea is to position you top of mind for your audience. And in contrast to one-off advertising, content marketing really shows that you care about your stakeholders. So that's all great, but what does it look like in the real world? So there are many types of content. A few common ones that I'm going to be talking about today include blog posts, stakeholder stories, ebooks or how-to guides. You can kind of think of them as that as well. White papers and email marketing. And these tools all work to generate awareness for and interest in your organization. And again, they do that by building relationships, because we know that's what's critical to attracting and retaining your audience's attention. You can think of content marketing actually as a type of inbound marketing. And as I mentioned before, it doesn't involve things like outbound, sort of look at me, salesy type of tactics. Things like that, which would include digital advertising, for example, are more costly and less effective at building relationships. Now, I do want to mention, it's not to say that if you currently are advertising that you should stop. I'm not saying that by any means. I also advertise for my own business. Basically, what I'm trying to impress upon you is that you will need both inbound and outbound pillars to your marketing strategy in order for it to succeed to its fullest potential. Okay, so let's talk about the impact that content marketing can have on your nonprofit. So it can be powerful, and I love to use statistics to illustrate the impact. So specific to nonprofits, we've got, almost all of donors or members considering content created by nonprofits to be trustworthy. As marketers, we know that there are a lot of issues today in the industry with content being shared on social media that isn't considered trustworthy. Sort of two areas, although the news media has struggled in this area, it is still viewed as more trustworthy than social media. And obviously, as you can see, organizations with a reputable mandate, which nonprofits would fall into, are viewed as even more trustworthy than that. So that you definitely have a lot going for the industry in that case. Content marketing generates over 3 times more leads than outbound marketing and costs 62% less. So again, it's building that know, like, and trust factor that is what makes it so effective. And nearly 3/4 of nonprofits say content has increased their lead quality. So I think what that really means is that a lot of times you may get someone approaching you that isn't really a fit for your organization. But the more that you can educate your audience about what you do, the more you'll have that fit aligned, instead of kind of going back and forth and then it ends up that there isn't a fit there. So before you can get started with your content marketing, it is super important to have a well-defined and consistent brand story and voice. And I'm going to talk through, all of the reasons why that is, but essentially, you want to have the upfront work done before you spend the time on creating a bunch of marketing tactics that may or may not work if they're not crafted properly. So I want to spend a bit of time on how to establish those written elements of your brand, the story and the voice, to lay a strong foundation for the content that you will produce going forward. Okay, so who here has a visual identity for their organization? This could be a logo, or it could be, a more robust identity with brand colors, fonts, and guidelines on how to use those design elements. So if you have a visual identity, please let me know in the chat. Okay, we're getting a few yeses here. That's great to see. Perfect. All right, so, and keep it coming if you haven't answered yet and you'd like to, of course. Who here would say that you have a verbal or a written brand identity? And so that could look like work that you've done around your brand story, voice, or messaging. So hop into the chat and let me know. Okay, so we've got our first no, which is very common, and I'm going to talk about this in a second. Yes, a large written guide. Yeah, for the town of Banff, that definitely makes sense. Not so much. In development, always. Yeah, a lot of these things are ongoing things. And I think that's actually a very good point. That's important to mention. And Moselle says we need to work on this. Yeah, that's fair. So for everyone who doesn't have documented written branding elements for their nonprofit, that is totally understandable. I kind of always like to think that, when you're running a tight ship with limited resources, there are a ton of things to think about. Certainly, I know that myself, running a startup company, essentially, that works with contract writers. And of course, your zone of genius is going to be your organization and the industry that you work within, which means that it may not be marketing or writing, and that is totally fine. Same reason why I have a lawyer and an accountant, because I am not going to try to do those things myself. But when you think about it, your brand's visual identity likely has consistency. And I mean, it sounds like everybody here has one, whether it's a logo or whether it's more robust with brand colors as well. So I want you to think of your verbal or written identity in the same way, and that's the way that you come across in writing and in all of your communications. It is critical to building brand awareness and credibility. And in fact, consistent presentation of a brand can increase your revenue by 33%. So we are going to dive into the first exercise here. If everybody can either grab a notebook or, jot down some notes in your phone, we'll be going through a few questions here. So we're gonna talk about the marketing foundation that you need to establish before you begin creating content. And that is a strong brand story, voice, and messaging. And this way, when it comes time to create content, yours will be on brand, consistent, and engaging. And if you've already started doing these things, and like Natasha mentioned, it's in development always. So if you're active on social media, but you're like, oh, I don't have, these things yet, that's fine. It's just a matter of kind of refining that and being more consistent as you go along. So I'd like to take a few minutes to just get some creativity flowing around these topics. So I'm going to pose the question to you, and then I'll just mute myself for a moment or two to give you some time to write notes. But I want you to first think back to the moment that you decided you were either going to start your nonprofit organization or that you were going to join the organization. And I want you to think about what the driving factor behind that decision was. Was it a passion for what you do, for the mandate? Was it a gap in the market that you felt was there, that you felt could be addressed? So just spend a few minutes writing some notes on that origin story. And if you'd like to share, I'd love that. Keeps things interesting. Pop your answers in the chat when you're finished. I think this message is from Ruth. It's looking like it's just not showing your name because you already sent one prior to that. So from Ruth, it says, usually the driving factors are a passion or seeing and meeting a gap. Yeah, and obviously, of course, also wanting to make a difference. We have another answer here. Yeah, in order to continue doing meaningful work. So, oh, and I see you've already answered the other question, which is great. So if anybody is sort of finished with that first answer, the next thing I'd like you to think about is the values that your organization embodies. And so we have one answer here: respect, support, inclusiveness, learning, and encouragement. And I'm going to hop back to the first question here. Moselle said, Bow Valley Nonprofits was formed to help support local nonprofits with the goal of building capacity and sharing resources. Now, if anyone else wants to put either their origin story or their values in the chat, that would be great. And if you are kind of moving right along through these, the final question is really tying it all together. And so for that, I want you to think about, you know, the brand story, the values, and then how does that come across in your brand's voice? So this can literally just be brainstorming a few words that represent characteristics that, you know, describe the nonprofit itself. Bow Valley Nonprofits values include inclusion, diversity, and collaboration. Love it. All right, adventure, explore, move, get muddy. Oh, I love that one. Inclusion, innovation, and impact. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so if anyone has any other, you know, values or characteristics of the brand that you want to share, please feel free to keep putting them in the chat. I am gonna keep things moving along and head on to the next slide because I want to talk about how we're actually going to put this into practice. Okay, so obviously that was a very quick little taste of doing some creative work around a brand story, values, and characteristics that you can, you know, work with your team to shape into a brand personality and voice. It would, you know, be more robust and take longer than that if we were to actually sit down and do something like that together. But what I wanted to do is just give you an idea of why it's important to begin thinking about that kind of work. It can help you grow your audience as well as the interest in your mission and initiatives. You know, it can benefit you in several ways. They're all up on the slide there, but it can help you build brand awareness, recognition, and stakeholder loyalty. Again, because it goes back to that know, like, and trust factor, and people can't really get to know you and they can't really trust you until they've seen you show up consistently in the marketplace over and over and over, you know, until they know your story, until they understand what you stand for, and until they can recognize your brand voice and personality. If these things are changing every time, or if they're not defined, it's going to be more difficult for you to build brand awareness and recognition, and it is going to take longer. So doing this work can give you a competitive edge. It can improve. This is a big one. Improve your ability to shape the narrative about your organization. The thing that I would like to call out about this, and I think this comes from my days as a journalist, and Tanya will know this well, but if you are not either participating in your own story, you know, if you're not sharing that story, if you're not shaping that story, you risk someone else doing that for you, right? So you want to be the one shaping the narrative. And of course, obviously in collaboration with your partners and stakeholders, but you need to be putting that out there for people so that they know what you're about. And obviously in the end, this work just enables you to have a greater impact with more efficient marketing. And that's the goal that we're trying to achieve here. So before we move into the second part of the workshop, which is going to be focused on 5 types of content that you can create to generate awareness and interest, I'm just wondering if anybody has any final questions on this. You can also ask like anytime you think of something, or you can ask at the end, but just feel free to pop any questions in the chat about the branding portion that we've just discussed. Okay, an origin story or what it contains. Yeah, so I mean, there are, a few ways of describing this. Essentially, when I'm talking about a brand story, I'm talking about, everything from the beginnings of the nonprofit to who you serve, why you serve them. It shouldn't read like, a historical timeline or anything like that. It should really be a dynamic story that shows people why you exist and also allows them to see themselves reflected in your mission, and to begin to think of ways that they can engage with you and that they can relate to you. And so a brand story can, it can show up either word for word on the about page of your website, for example. It can be something that is used in boilerplates at the bottom of press releases. Obviously, that would be a shorter version. It can be, condensed further into little snippets that you put in your social media profiles. But I think the most important thing to remember is to really paint that unique picture, obviously, of who you are, who you serve, why you exist. And then again, I'll keep saying it, but again, remain consistent in that story, and have the personality come across in the story as well. So we don't just want to have it sound like a generic bio that somebody else wrote. Like if you have a certain brand personality or voice, you want to be able to have that reflected in the story that you're telling about your brand. You are welcome. Okay, so now let's talk about content specifically. Okay, so once you've nailed your story and your messaging, you can begin communicating your organization's expertise and the value of your programs or your services through content. So I want to talk about 5 different types of content that you can use to generate both awareness and interest. So I've just quickly put the definition here again. I'm not going to read it out loud, but again, content marketing is all about relationship building. And so the types of content that I'm going to suggest to you will reflect that goal. The point of this is that when you know your target audience well, which hopefully you all do, I think, it sounds like you all do. And when you know how to articulate your brand story and messaging in a clear and consistent way, you can really get started with content marketing and try out a bunch of different things and have some fun with it. Now, the important thing that I think, again, for when we're working in environments where we have limited resources, which really is such a common thing for everyone, but certainly is the case in the nonprofit world as well. It's important to be prepared for this. It's important to have a content strategy in place before you just kind of go out producing a bunch of different types of content. The reason why is, again, it goes back to that efficiency piece, and it goes back to being able to make the greatest impact with your marketing in the most efficient and streamlined way possible. Where, when, and how your brand shows up to your market is incredibly important. And there is a reason why top performing organizations use content strategies, and that's simply to make their marketing efforts worthwhile. Developing a strategy before you really dig into content creation will just help you ensure that you're communicating clearly about who you are, what you do, and who you serve, which, we talked about being elements of a brand story, but that also needs to be woven throughout your entire marketing. We always want to be communicating those things. And it will also help you create content for your stakeholders at every stage of their journey if you have a strategy in place. And this is true whether someone is just getting to know your organization or whether they're ready to make a commitment like a donation or volunteering their time. Each type of stakeholder requires a different kind of content, and I'm going to talk more about that later. Okay, so just a few more statistics because I like them, because I think they're helpful to show the value of engaging in content marketing. We have 70% of marketers actively investing in this. 83% of nonprofits are using newsletters to communicate with their audiences, and 65% blog regularly. Oftentimes I get asked, do people still read? How long should a blog post be? And the answer to that is yes, absolutely. Even in the world of everybody dancing on Instagram, people do still read. Long form blog posts actually generate more web traffic than short form ones, but you have to find what works for you, the amount of time that you have to dedicate to this stuff, and your audience as well. What defines a blog? So typically, and actually we are going to, I'm only going to wait, Ruth, just because I have a whole slide on blogs that's coming right up. But I'm definitely going to discuss that with you. Okay, perfect. All right, so again, these are the types of content that we're going to go through: blog posts, stakeholder stories, ebooks, white papers, and email marketing. Bottom line of doing this is that you are delivering value to your audience. That is the purpose of creating content. A side benefit is establishing your expertise to build a relationship. But first and foremost, your content needs to be something that is actually useful and helpful to your audience. Okay, so let's dig into blog posts. So I would describe a blog post as, basically an article. It would live on your website. They can range in length. The shortest blog posts we tend to write for people are about 500 words. They can go up to, 2,000 words plus for long form blogs, depending on whether you are really trying to drive organic traffic. And I can either discuss that offline with people, the intricacies of SEO, I'm not going to get into in this workshop. But essentially, it's an article that is focused on a specific topic. And again, the idea is to help your audience. So it's different than, just a social media post or a newsletter, because it is focused on one specific thing. I have a blog on the Scribe National site that you can check out. Some examples of blog posts for that is there's literally one that's called "What is Content Marketing?" So they can be used to educate your audience about different topics. They can also be used, like, for example, if there is a legislative update around tax on corporate donations or something like that, it can be used to kind of show that you are up to date on things happening in your industry and that you want to share this information with stakeholders to help educate them as well. So they can serve different purposes, but the idea is to show that, you are invested in your community and in your volunteers and obviously your donors, the people you serve with your programs, and that you want to put information out there that's helpful to them. I hope that answers the question. If it doesn't, I can certainly clarify further. So anyway, blogs tend to generate a lot more leads actually than using paid ads. And again, it's because it's coming back to that factor of trust. They make your website 4 times more likely to be found by your audience through organic search. Search engine optimization is a whole other field, but when you don't have a large advertising budget, but when you still want to drive traffic to your website, using specific keywords in your blog post is a very good way to do that and is one of the foundations of content marketing. And yeah, so I, as we talked about a lot already, relationship building is the goal here and what you're doing when you're doing this process. Now, if you don't have a blog and you're kind of wondering how to get started, one thing I always like to suggest is just determining what your audience finds valuable, and how you can best help them. So oftentimes I will suggest to people to think about the questions that they get asked a lot. Think about, things that people find confusing, maybe misconceptions people have, common challenges people have. Anything like that is an excellent blog topic. The idea is to help someone either learn something or to solve a problem. Okay, I'm going to keep going. If at any time anyone has questions about any of these, please feel free to ask. So the next thing I want to discuss is stakeholder stories. These can take many, many different forms, but they're extremely effective for making your mission and your initiatives the undeniable choice for people to either volunteer or donate or to form a partnership with you. These are what we would call in the marketing and sales world, bottom of the funnel content. This is when, you are telling really engaging narratives about real people who either overcame obstacles or achieved goals with the help of your organization. So they're different from blogs in the sense that, a blog is about a topic and it's more educational. This is about, here is a firsthand account of how we impacted someone's life. And this is kind of when you're either trying to seal the deal with a donation or something else of that nature. Kind of also in the corporate world and in the consumer space, when you think about like online reviews, it's similar to that concept where it's that social proof. It's not your organization saying, look how great we are. it's actually someone else stepping up and saying that for you. And Moselle has asked here, is a stakeholder story the same as a case study? So I think stakeholder stories, I see them as like a wider umbrella, but a case study is a type of stakeholder story. Absolutely, yeah. Other things could just be even something as small as a testimonial on your website that you get from someone. It can be, you know, someone hopping on a quick video with you on an Instagram live to you know, show the atmosphere at an event they're attending and what it means to them to be there today. So just anything that you can get your stakeholders to really be the voice for your organization, those can all be stakeholder stories. You know, going back to the concept of reviews, 72% of consumers will take action only after reading a positive review. So obviously that statistic is a little broader than the nonprofit world in general, but it really shows the fact that people are looking for social proof, and they're not always looking to just make a decision based on what you say about yourself. So it's really important to incorporate your stakeholders' voices into your communications. Now, if you're not already using stakeholder stories, you can simply get started by brainstorming with your team to just identify a few people who either had, you know, an interesting or a tricky challenge to solve, or it could be a long-standing volunteer who you just know would love to kind of share what drives them to be involved with your organization. And of course, that's kind of the bottom line here, is that it needs to be something that someone is willing to share and willing to have published and, you know, is comfortable with that. Because again, everything goes back to trust, and we want to maintain that trust with existing stakeholders. And that's paramount, I think, over acquiring new stakeholders. Okay, so we're going to move on to ebooks. So this is one of the most effective types of content marketing for providing information that is useful, helpful, quickly actionable. It's also an opportunity for your nonprofit to delve deeper into your message than a blog post could. So I'm going to describe basically exactly what it is. So this typically takes the form of a PDF that lives on your website behind a download form. And so it can be anything, like it can be a how-to guide, it can be a report. We'll actually talk about that in a moment. The reports tend to be classified a little more as white papers. An ebook is usually something that's a little more, it's more of a light touch. It's not a research-heavy academic type document. However, the purpose is similar. You know, you're using an ebook to demonstrate your knowledge. You're using it to help your audience learn. Could simply just be a checklist of things that people want to know when they are hosting a stakeholder event, for example. Something as simple as that could be an ebook. The purpose, of course, is obviously to build that relationship with your audience and to collect email addresses for your email list. Now, there's obviously an entire world of anti-spam law and email consent law that I'm not going to get into at the moment, but traditionally nonprofits are actually exempt from that, as long as, you know, you're using best practices, like you're not just randomly spamming people. And that's why when we do create these forms, we want to put a sign-off checkbox, obviously, that people can give their consent and sign up for emails. But again, ebooks are a great way to do this, because in return for giving you their email address, they're actually getting something of value that's going to be interesting and helpful. And, you know, it has spin-off benefits for you, because you can use content from those ebooks. You can repurpose it for a short little Instagram post, for a video. You know, we don't always want to create content once and then never use it again and then have to recreate the wheel every time. We want to try to get the most mileage from every piece of content that we create as we possibly can. So to help, you know, even just brainstorm ideas about ebooks, again, sit with your team, gather the most common questions that your audience asks you on social media, and, you know, see if you can get a few topic ideas from that. As I mentioned before, checklists and how-to guides are really common formats that we tend to see with this type of content. Okay, so we have two more things to cover. Of course, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to let me know. White papers are pretty similar to ebooks in that they are generally going to be a PDF. They are generally going to live on your website behind a download form. which is also known as gated content, if you've ever heard that term. It's also known as a lead magnet, if you've ever heard that term. The marketing industry loves its jargon. So white papers are comprehensive guides to topics that are often complex. So it could be a report on your industry, it could be findings that you've collected with other partners that you are now presenting in this report. But the idea is that you're establishing your organization as a thought leader. And so this is typically useful in the middle of the funnel. And obviously as a nonprofit, you're not really thinking of it maybe as the same type of sales funnel that a corporation would. But it's in that phase in a relationship with a stakeholder where they're aware of your organization, but they're still making choices about maybe do they want to donate here? Do they want to support you with their time and whatnot? And so this is going to help establish you as a credible resource and as someone really who's interested in just furthering your industry as a whole by producing these type of reports. It is more academic, obviously, but it is going to help, position you as someone that people can turn to for guidance and facts. All right, so the last thing here, and I'm sure this is a very common one. I'm sure a lot of you are already doing this, but either email marketing. So 90% of marketers are using email to generate leads for their own companies. A lot of the nonprofits that we work with are using email as well, for different reasons. Obviously, in a world where COVID is hopefully calming down a little bit, we may see email again to generate interest in in-person events. We are obviously seeing email to remind people of campaigns that they have going on. We're seeing email to share stories, and it's probably one of the most common on this list. Obviously, for that reason, it's highly competitive, and every one of us probably woke up to a ton of emails in our inbox this morning from different colleagues, different brands, but don't let it deter you. So, if you're worried about getting banished to the junk folder, keep in mind that your audience will be looking for your emails, or at least will not be looking to delete them right away if you get the content right. This goes back to the market research phase, like understanding who your stakeholders are and understanding the type of information that they want from you. It's also really important to use any of the metrics that your email software gives you and just see what is resonating with people in your emails. What are people clicking on? Obviously, give them more of the types of content that they are actually wanting to consume. Again, we don't want to recreate the wheel every time. So if you think back, to the types of content that we just discussed, which was the blog posts, the stakeholder stories, the ebooks, and the white papers. Whenever you produce something like that, that's also something that you can use to fill your email newsletter and to let people know, hey, we have this new report on this, or here's a profile on this volunteer, things like that. So you want to always be cross-promoting all of the content that you're creating. Okay, so I feel like we just went through a lot there. Does anyone have any questions? There is an exercise still left to do. I should probably ask you, Moselle, at this point, would you like me to hop into that second exercise, or how are we doing for time? Because I know that, okay, yeah, so I'll go right into that exercise, and then we'll do questions at the end. Okay, so I want everybody to think about, I might actually do all these questions at once just because I know that we are running short on time, but take a few notes. Think about what challenges your target audience has. But don't just think about the challenge itself. It's really, really important to think about how the challenge makes them feel, because that is where you're going to get a story for your communications or for your marketing. Same goes for solutions. Take a few notes, what solutions do you offer? What do your stakeholders say is the impact of working with you? So it's not just about, we have this program for this group. It's really, and nonprofits, like, you guys are all excellent at telling impact stories anyway, so I don't need to harp on this too much, but we need to get to the heart of what it makes people feel. Thank you, Ruth, I appreciate that. And then again, I mentioned this earlier, but what are some of the most common questions that you get asked about your organization or your programs? literally, these questions are blog post ideas. You know, these questions are ideas for a video Q&A with someone on your team. These questions lead directly to content because these are the things that people actually want to know about. And then finally, what are some of the obstacles that come up for people when deciding whether to donate or volunteer? It is very important to be aware of those things because that's the only way, you know, that you can help dispel them. Whatever those are for you, they're going to be different for everybody. We need to address obstacles and barriers to engagement head on. We don't want to ignore them or sweep them under the rug. So it can be very helpful to create content that delves into those things as well. I mean, obviously for donors, it's simply one of them is just that there's obviously so many options. So it's what makes you the best option, but we have to want to tackle those obstacles. So I think in the interest of time, and Moselle is, I think, going to be sending out these slides anyway, but the purpose of going through these questions is to get, you know, the foundation for the stories that you're going to tell in your content marketing to help your audience get to know, like, and trust you. I am going to give you a final piece of homework to do with these questions. And again, this will be sent out. So once you've kind of done basically a brain dump of all of the answers to these questions, the next step is actually to categorize these into 3 categories. So what they are is awareness, education, and conversion. And I know that these, you know, they may sound a little more salesy and they may not sound exactly like how you would speak about it, but essentially the conversion stage is just when someone is ready to make a commitment, whether that's a gift or whether that's volunteering their time or whether that's partnering with you. Now, I'm going to talk through all 3 of them, but I just wanted to call that out first because conversion is a very sales and marketing type word. So in the awareness section, you always want to think that you need to create content for people who are completely new to either what you do or to your industry as a whole. You can't just assume that someone has a certain level of understanding. You want to always have something there for them that's very introductory and very high level. And that is why, I think I mentioned it before, but that is why I have a blog post on my blog that's titled, "What is Content Marketing?" So, you know, it's just very, very introductory and just giving people the basics. Education is probably where you're going to create most of your content. That's what I tend to find with the organizations that we work with. These topics are for people who are fully aware of their situation. You know, maybe it's a company who's looking to expand their social responsibility mandate and find new organizations to contribute to or to invest in, but they're looking for tips, they're looking for how-tos, they're looking for guidance. So this is your chance to build a strong relationship so that when whoever it is, whether it's a donor or a volunteer or a partner or government, for example, is ready to make a commitment, your organization comes to mind first. Ebooks and white papers are very useful tools at this stage of the process. And then I did just mention it, but conversion is for people who've decided they are going to make a commitment and they want to know things like how your specific programs can get them the results they want. So this could be something like, you know, not only having a donor benefits package or like a sponsor benefits package, it could also actually be a stakeholder story to accompany that and to really make it more powerful. So I know I flew through that last part there. There is a lot that goes into content marketing, and this is only part of it, but I wanted to really give you an idea for stories that you can tell your audience at each stage on their journey. And so, of course, that's a mix of going back to the questions that we first went over. And it's also then thinking about, once you have some ideas for topics, how to group them so that you ensure that you're not leaving anybody out of the conversation, and so that you are actually creating content that's relevant to everyone. Yes, so we've covered everything from how to define your brand story and voice, to how to strategically create content, to how to use the different types of content to establish your mission and the value of your initiatives. So I know we're running very short now. You can go to these links here to download some free gifts if you would like, that will give you some ideas about how to create content. And I would love to open it up for questions at this point. how often should a nonprofit be producing content? So basically, it's whatever you can commit to that is consistent. The most important thing to do is, again, to be reliable and to be trustworthy. So I am very, very, very much against somebody just like posting a blog post or a social media post, dropping off the face of the earth for 6 months and then doing something. It doesn't have to be, you know, multiple times a week by any means. It just has to be consistent. So it's going to depend on like how big your team is and you know, how much time you can dedicate to that. And of course, sometimes it does make sense if it's going to take you way longer than it's going to take to outsource it. You know, that's always an option that people can explore too. Okay, so tips for new nonprofits or organizations with limited capacity. Again, I think just like it may sound like the last thing you want to do when you have limited capacity, but really taking the time to do the work up front of your strategy. It will save you so much time in the end. So I think that's really my tip, is like do some reading, gather some resources, create a strategy, and then commit to, you know, 2 types of content, for example, that you want to really excel at, whether that's maybe a video series, and these don't have to be professionally produced videos, I'm just using that as an example, or whether it's like 1 blog post a month, something like that. Whatever you commit to should be something that's realistic. It should be something that can be consistent, and don't feel like you have to do everything all the time. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So yeah, Ruth mentions like going through the questions with a board or another nonprofit. So when I was on the board of the Canadian Mountain Arts Foundation, we had, it wasn't like specifically about marketing, but we did have the board get together and kind of go through a strategy exercise. And I'm sure that a lot of you have either participated in things like that or know someone who has, but it is not something you want to do in a vacuum. Like you definitely do want to have multiple voices at the table. So going through those questions about either like, what do they think your brand voice is? And it's also even a helpful check of like, well, here's what we think our voice is, but is this how we're actually coming across? And, you know, what do we think are the best types of content to produce? Of course, on top of going through things with a board or with another nonprofit, I definitely want to emphasize, like, ask your community and ask your stakeholders what they want to see from you. And I think Ruth's suggestion of using either a website forum or a Facebook page to do that is super important, but you definitely want to be asking your audience what they want.
Great, thank you so much, Afton. If anyone else has any more questions, feel free to add them to the chat box. I'll also be sending an email out at the end of the session with Afton's contact details. So feel free to touch base with her. Oh, she's got her contact details there. Feel free to touch base with her as well after the session if you'd like to continue the conversation. Thank you so much, Afton, for taking the time to share your knowledge with us today. That was a really great presentation. I really liked all the tips that you had, and I think that the nonprofits will find that super useful. Thank you so much for that, Afton.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Moselle. And I see some people popping into the chat here. So yeah, thank you just for attending. And that's what makes it fun. This, you know, there is jargon in the marketing industry and things like that, but it's actually, I'm so passionate about presenting this stuff and getting to meet people who are extremely passionate about what they do. So thanks for being here.
That's awesome. Thank you. And if everyone would like to save the date for our next session, it's on July 27th, and that's going to be with Jenny Spur from Perch Communications, who will share her insights on communications planning and pitching. So that's going to be a really great follow-on from Afton's session. And I'll be sending out a survey with the email. If you could please complete it. It's only a couple of questions. It really helps inform future sessions, and we appreciate your time. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And the recording will be available on the Bow Valley website under training in a couple of hours. Thanks so much, Afton. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.